My name is Dorothy Hale. I am 74 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I was nothing more than the quiet foundation of a family that rarely noticed the weight I carried. I taught school for 35 years, raised 2 children, buried a husband I adored, and when the house grew empty, I sold the little place in town and bought a small farm in Vermont. My dream was simple: mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons tending the garden Samuel and I once talked about, evenings listening to the crickets sing. I thought I had finally earned my rest. Then the phone rang. It was my son, Michael. His voice carried that sharp edge of entitlement I had learned to recognize. "Take the guest room," he said. "I'm coming with Sabrina and her family, 8 of them. If you don't like it, Mom, you can always go back to the city." I remember standing there with the receiver pressed to my ear, the late afternoon sun flooding the kitchen window, dust motes swirling like tiny witnesses. My heart dropped like a stone into a well. I wanted to ask him if he remembered who built this life, if he remembered his father's hands bleeding from fence posts, if he remembered me bending over a second job so he could attend business school. But I said nothing. I simply answered, "Okay." In that silence, I made a decision. Samuel once gave me a handkerchief, stitched with tiny blue flowers. "So you will always remember," he said, "that quiet things can last longer than loud ones." I keep that handkerchief in my pocket still, and as Michael's words echoed, I pressed the fabric between my fingers and knew I would not argue. I would not beg. I would let the farm, this land that held Samuel's memory, speak for me. So when they arrived, SUVs lined like invaders at the gate, trunks spilling luggage, laughter too loud for the fields, they expected a retreat, a resort. They expected me to make space and smile. They never imagined what they would find, because while they had been planning to take, I had been preparing to teach, and the lesson would not be delivered with shouting or slammed doors. It would be delivered in the way the hot water ran too cold too soon, in the rooster who guarded the porch swing like a knight, in the silence of nights too dark for city hearts. I had set the stage with care, not revenge, not cruelty, only the truth of what they thought they wanted. This was my farm, my sanctuary, my boundary, and before the weekend ended, they would understand what it meant to treat a mother's life like a spare hotel room. So let me tell you what happened when my son came to claim my peace and what he found instead. When I was a young woman, no one asked me what I dreamed of. Dreams were a luxury in those days. What mattered was paying the bills, keeping food on the table, making sure the children never felt the weight of scarcity that had defined my own childhood. I slipped into the role of caretaker, the way most women of my generation did, quietly, without ceremony. I met Samuel at a church picnic when I was 19. He was older by 4 years, wearing a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, his hands already calloused from construction work. There was a steadiness about him, a gravity that pulled me in. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried the kind of honesty you could build a life on. I married him 2 years later in a modest ceremony where my bouquet came from my mother's garden, not from a florist. Our life together was not glamorous. Samuel worked long days building homes for other families while we raised our own. I took a teaching job at the elementary school, shaping young minds with chalk dust on my skirts and tired eyes that still managed to shine when I came home to my babies. We made sacrifices that no one but us noticed. New shoes were rare. Vacations were rarer still. But we had a home filled with laughter, and at night, when Samuel laid his flannel shirt across the chair and wrapped his arms around me, I believed we had everything that mattered. Still, Samuel carried a quiet dream. "One day, Dorothy," he would say, pointing at a patch of farmland we'd pass on the road, "we'll have a place like that, 10, maybe 20 acres. Horses grazing at the fence line, a garden big enough to feed us through winter, a porch where we can sit with our coffee and watch the sun climb over the hills." His eyes would light up, and I would nod, though I knew the numbers never added up. There was always a tuition payment, a leaking roof, a medical bill waiting to devour the little we saved. The dream became like a photograph you keep in your wallet, worn, faded, but still precious. When Samuel got sick, everything changed. Cancer does not ask permission. It arrives, takes, and leaves you to sort through the wreckage. I became his nurse, his advocate, his witness to suffering no man should have to endure. Even in those brutal months, he still talked about the farm. "Promise me, Dorothy," he whispered once, his hand trembling in mine. "Promise me you'll find that place when I'm gone. Live it for both of us." I pressed the handkerchief he had given me years before into his palm, the one embroidered with blue flowers, and swore I would try. After his funeral, I felt like a hollow shell moving through days that had lost their meaning. My children were grown, busy with their own lives. Michael was ambitious, Sabrina already by his side, her heels clicking on marble floors while I trudged across linoleum. They told me to downsize, to sell the house, to think about practicality. Practicality, to them, meant an apartment near the city. Neighbors stacked like boxes. No soil, no stars. But I remembered Samuel's dream. I could not bury it alongside him. It took years, but eventually I found this place in Vermont. 10 acres, a worn red barn, a creek that gurgled even in dry months. The farmhouse needed work, but the bones were strong, just like Samuel's hands had been. I planted his roses by the porch the very first week, yellow like the sun, stubborn against the wind. Every nail I hammered, every window I mended, felt like a conversation with him. When I walked through the fields at dusk, I could almost hear his boots crunching beside me. And yet, as I settled into this new rhythm, Michael grew more distant. Phone calls turned into obligations, then into negotiations. He asked about the land's value more than he asked about my health. He reminded me that retirement accounts ran out, that maintenance was expensive, that a woman your age can't manage that kind of property alone. His words were wrapped as concern, but beneath them was calculation. So when he called and announced, not asked, that he and 8 relatives were descending, something in me broke and hardened at once. If Samuel had been alive, he would have stood between me and that disrespect like a wall. He would have said, "This is your mother. This is her home. You treat her with reverence." Instead, Michael spoke as if I were a tenant, as if my labor and my losses were nothing but background noise to his entitlement. I pressed Samuel's handkerchief against my heart and wondered if he could see this moment. What would he think? Would he blame me for raising a son who measured worth in property lines instead of love? Or would he understand that sometimes seeds sprout into something twisted, no matter how carefully you tend the soil? I want to believe Samuel would have told me not to cry, that he would remind me the dream was ours, not Michael's, that he would say I had the right to guard it fiercely, even in silence. But the truth is, I will never know. That question, what Samuel would think, sits like a stone in my chest. So I did the only thing I knew. I chose quiet resolve over noise. I chose to let Michael walk into a truth he was unprepared for, the truth of hard work, of boundaries, of a life not meant to be consumed like a weekend getaway. The night before they arrived, I sat on the porch with Samuel's flannel draped over my shoulders, the roses nodding in the evening breeze, the creek murmuring its eternal song. I looked at the stars, clear and unyielding, and whispered, "If you are watching, Samuel, know that I am ready, ready to defend what you love, ready to live the dream you left me, even if I must do it alone." And when the sound of engines broke the silence the next afternoon, when Michael's caravan of relatives poured into the drive like a conquering army, I remained seated, handkerchief folded in my pocket, Samuel's voice echoing in memory. I did not greet them with anger or tears. I simply watched, steady as the land itself, knowing that by the end of the weekend they would come to understand. They thought they were arriving at a retreat. They were arriving at a lesson. The sound of engines arrived before the dust had. Time to settle. 3 SUVs rolled up my drive as if the farm had been waiting for them. Doors flung open, voices tumbled out, and in a matter of seconds my quiet Vermont afternoon was cracked wide open by the clamor of a crowd that had not asked to come, but had already decided they belonged. Michael stepped out first, sunglasses perched like a shield. Behind him came Sabrina, heels clicking against gravel, her dress more suited for a gallery opening than a farmhouse yard. And then the flood. Her mother, Patricia, with a purse large enough to smuggle a dog, Sabrina's two brothers dragging coolers, a sister with children already darting across the lawn, cousins spilling out like an untamed tide. Their laughter was sharp, out of place, echoing off the barn walls like an invasion trumpet. I did not move from the porch swing. I pressed the embroidered handkerchief in my pocket, the one Samuel had given me, and let my face hold a small smile. A smile that could be mistaken for welcome, but was, in truth, a mask of still water covering depths they could not see. "Mom!" Michael called, as if announcing himself at a hotel check-in desk. "We're here." He gestured at the others like a ringmaster presenting a circus. Patricia's voice pierced the air before I could rise. "What's the Wi-Fi password?" she demanded, not even glancing at me, already fishing for her phone. "I need to upload our location. My friends will be jealous." This was my home, the land Samuel and I had dreamed of, and in less than 2 minutes, they had reduced it to a weekend resort. I stood, slow, steady. "There isn't one," I said gently. "No Wi-Fi." Patricia blinked as though I'd told her the house lacked oxygen. "No Wi-Fi?" she repeated, scandal dripping from every syllable. "How do you live?" "Quietly," I answered. Inside, my chest tightened, but not from fear, from clarity. Every gesture, every careless laugh was a confirmation that my silence had been the right choice. They expected indulgence. They expected me to point. Instead, I watched. I observed like Samuel used to when he surveyed his work, taking in every crooked nail, every weak beam, because to see clearly is to know how to act later. Sabrina leaned close to Michael, whispering something with a smirk. He nodded, his eyes sliding past me as if I were furniture. The others carried their luggage directly into the house without waiting for an invitation. Doors slammed, footsteps pounded upstairs, and drawers opened as if this place had already been deeded to them. I held on to Samuel's flannel memory like armor. My silence was not a weakness. It was a strategy. As the commotion swelled, I noticed movement at the fence line. Eleanor stood there, my neighbor from 2 farms over. 80 years old, sharp as a tack, with hair the color of frost and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She rested both hands on her cane, watching the spectacle unfold with the faintest tilt of her head. We had shared coffee more than once, sitting on her porch, trading stories about husbands gone and children who had forgotten where they came from. Eleanor understood things without needing them explained. Our eyes met across the field. She raised one eyebrow, a question without words. I let my smile curve just slightly higher, the kind of smile only another woman of age and endurance could interpret. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, then turned back toward her house. No judgment, no intrusion, just silent acknowledgement that she had seen, and that was enough. Inside, Sabrina's voice carried down the staircase. "This guest room is too small. Michael will take the master." I heard the thud of suitcases dropped on Samuel's side of the bed I had not shared with anyone since he left this world. I closed my eyes for a moment, pressing the handkerchief tight in my palm, and breathed through the sting. When I opened them again, Eleanor's house was still visible in the distance, her curtain drawn back just enough for her to observe. She was my mirror, my silent witness, reminding me I was not alone even if I stood surrounded by noise. At dinner, they sprawled across my table like conquerors. Patricia complained about the lack of sparkling water. Sabrina picked at the roast chicken, remarking how different it was from the city restaurants. One of the cousins asked if there was a spa nearby. Another scrolled on her phone, groaning about poor reception. I served them quietly, the way I once served Samuel when his body was too weak to rise from bed. Except now, every plate set down was a test. Would they notice? Would they care? Of course not. Gratitude was foreign currency at this table. Michael finally lifted his glass, filled with the sweet tea I'd brewed from my garden mint. "To new beginnings," he declared. His eyes flicked toward me as if to say, See, Mom? We're already making this ours. I raised my own glass, not in agreement, but in defiance. To lessons learned, I said softly. They laughed, assuming I meant nothing more than politeness. But in that moment, I felt Samuel's presence beside me. He would have understood the double edge in those words. Later that night, when the house had gone dark except for the glow of their devices, I sat alone on the porch. The stars hung low and sharp, the kind Samuel used to trace with his finger. Eleanor's light flickered across the field. She stepped onto her porch, holding a mug, and lifted it toward me in a silent toast. I lifted my handkerchief in return. That was all. No speeches, no alliances forged. Just two women acknowledging the unspoken truth. Silence can be sharper than steel when wielded at the right moment. Inside my own home, guests slept in beds they had not earned, under a roof they did not value. They believed they had claimed something. But what they could never understand was that this land was not just boards and soil. It was memory, sacrifice, and promise. And those are not so easily taken. The night air was cool, fragrant with roses. I whispered into it, as if Samuel might hear. They think they've come for comfort. What they've come for is the truth. Morning came earlier than my uninvited guests expected. Out here, the rooster decides the day, not an alarm clock. Hector, my proud red-feathered sentinel, began crowing at 4:30 sharp. His voice carried across the yard, echoing through the thin farmhouse walls, rattling windows that had never known soundproofing. I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, the handkerchief beside me like a folded memory. I had learned long ago to let Hector's calls blend into the rhythm of dawn. But from upstairs came groans, curses muffled by pillows, and the unmistakable sound of Patricia slamming a door. When they finally shuffled into the kitchen an hour later, eyes swollen from lost sleep, I greeted them with a calm smile. "Good morning, I said softly. Patricia scowled. "Does he do that every day?" "Without fail," I replied. "He thinks the world depends on it." No one laughed. Breakfast was simple. Scrambled eggs, fresh bread, sliced tomatoes from my garden, food Samuel would have loved. But to Michael and Sabrina, it was beneath their taste. Michael pushed his plate away after a few bites. "Mom, you could at least stock something decent. Smoked salmon, maybe? Croissants?" Sabrina sniffed at the tomatoes. "They smell earthy, almost dirty." "They grew in the earth," I said, my tone even, my gaze steady. "That's where real food comes from." They exchanged glances, the kind that dismissed me without a word. The first complaint of the day arrived soon after. "The shower," one of Sabrina's brothers announced, rubbing his wet hair with a towel. "Scalding 1 second, ice cold the next, nearly burned me." "That's the plumbing," I explained. "She's old, temperamental. I need a gentle hand." But gentle hands were not something this group possessed. They demanded, they stomped, they cursed at faucets as though anger could smooth rust from pipes. By mid-morning, the porch had become a battleground of its own. Hector, who believed the swing was his rightful throne, strutted across the boards with wings spread wide. When Sabrina's nephews tried to sit, Hector lunged, spurs flashing, his crowing fierce enough to send them running. Their shrieks filled the yard as he chased them in circles. "Your rooster is vicious!" Patricia shouted from the doorway, her phone raised to capture the scene. "He nearly attacked the children." "He's protecting what's his," I answered. "The swing has always been his spot." The truth was, Hector had never harmed me. Samuel once said the bird recognized respect the way some men never could. He had been right. I offered no rescue, only watched as the boys darted behind the SUVs, Hector pacing in triumph before reclaiming his swing. His feathers glowed bronze in the sun, his chest puffed like a knight who had defended his castle. Sabrina huffed, brushing dust from her expensive dress. "This place is a nightmare. The smell, the dirt, the constant noise. Michael, I can't live like this." Michael rubbed his temples, his patience thinning. "Mom, can't you at least fix these problems? Get the plumbing done? Get rid of that rooster? Make the place more livable?" Livable. As if Samuel and I had not built every corner with our own hands. as if the decades of sweat and laughter that stained these walls counted for nothing. I felt the sting in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I looked at Michael, really looked at him, and wondered if he even saw me anymore, or only the inconvenience of my refusal to yield. If Samuel were still here, I whispered inside my own mind, what would he think of the way our son speaks to me? Would his heart break, or would he simply understand the way he always did, that some lessons can only be taught by time and silence? The rest of the morning unfolded with complaints echoing like clockwork. The towels were too scratchy. The coffee was too strong. The floors are too creaky. Each grievance piled upon the next until the air itself felt heavy with dissatisfaction. And yet I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I let the house do the speaking, the pipes, the rooster, the soil, the honest imperfections of a farm that does not bend for convenience. I carried myself quietly through each room, tidying where they had already left mess, steady as the trees outside. My silence unsettled them more than any confrontation could have. They expected a servant, a meek mother willing to bend. Instead, they found a woman who smiled, nodded, and gave them exactly what they thought they wanted: space to live their version of comfort. By midday, the cracks were showing. Patricia retreated to her room, muttering about migraines. Sabrina sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, desperate for a signal that would not come. Michael paced the porch, frustrated, restless, like a man trapped in a place he had chosen but no longer controlled. I took my coffee to the garden and breathed in the scent of tomatoes, basil, and damp soil. My knees ached as I crouched to pull weeds, but the ache was familiar, grounding. Samuel had always said the earth listens better than people do. That day, I believed him more than ever. I don't need to lecture them, I told the rows of beans swaying in the breeze. I don't need to shout. This land will teach them the truth. The house will remind them that nothing worth keeping bends easily. The dirt under their nails, the rooster on the porch, the pipes that refuse obedience, they are the voice of this place, stronger than mine could ever be. When I straightened, Eleanor stood by the fence, again her cane leaning against her hip. She had that look in her eyes, the one that said she knew more than she let on. "They're already squirming," she called across the field. "Won't take much." I smiled. "I'm not doing a thing." "Exactly," she answered. "That's the best way." She turned back to her house, leaving me with the faint echo of her wisdom. She knew. She always had. As the afternoon sun slid lower, the house groaned under the weight of strangers who did not understand it, and I, Dorothy Hale, sat in the quiet certainty that my silence would do the work words never could. The first cracks had appeared, and cracks, once they show, never stop widening. The afternoon dulled without warning. The air went from warm to metallic, like a coin pressed to the tongue. Out here, I can smell a storm before the sky decides, and I smelled this one as I rinsed coffee cups in the sink. The maple leaves flipped their pale undersides. Hector grew restless on the porch swing. The horses nosed the fence and stared toward the ridge as if someone had called their names. By the time the first thunder rolled, the house was already arguing with its guests. Patricia had been collecting complaints as if they were flowers. Sabrina was pacing with her phone raised like a divining rod, hunting a signal that does not live here. Michael rubbed his forehead the way he does when a deal begins to slip. No one thought to check the windows. The rain arrived in a single sheet, hard and sudden, the kind that finds every gap and dares you to patch it with your hands. The west-facing windows in the guest rooms swell when the air turns heavy. The frames stick. You must lift and slide in one motion, coax more than force. I had told Michael that once years ago, when he visited for exactly one night. He did not remember. I did not sprint upstairs. I set the cups in the rack. I dried my hands on Samuel's flannel slung over the chair. I took the little tablet from the drawer where I keep spare batteries and recipes for winter soups. The cameras are simple. A neighbor installed them when I first moved in, his gift to a widow who lived alone. I told myself they were for coyotes nosing the chicken coop. They have also become a mirror for human nature. On the tablet, the guest hallway bloomed into view. A gust cracked the window in Patricia's room open by an inch. Rain threaded through like needles, tapping the sill, then leaping to the bedspread. Her shriek rose high and thin. She shoved the frame with the heel of her palm. Old wood does not submit to impatience. The pain rattled and refused. Across the hall, a child cried as wind muscled through the screen. Sabrina burst in with a towel and discovered it was one of my wool ones. They are clean and honest. They do not lie about comfort. She rubbed the boy's hair. The fibers scraped and he yelped harder. On the camera, I saw Sabrina flinch, not from sympathy, but from inconvenience. Downstairs, someone lit candles. The power had not failed. The light was a comfort move. Unfortunately, the candles in the drawer are the birthday kind you cannot quite blow out. I keep them because they make me smile when I am alone. They sputtered like tiny fighters. Each time Patricia huffed a breath across the table, a ribbon of smoke rose. Then the flame licked back to life as if to say, "Try again." Storm water does not ask permission. It worked its way through the swollen frames and ran down the plaster in chalky lines, a map of every place the house has been patched and repatched by hands that loved it. The cousins scurried with blankets and found the scratchy army of wool I keep for deep winter nights. They spread them over sills and under doors, not understanding that wool soaks slowly, then holds tight, the way stubborn things often do. Hector took offense at thunder the way a soldier takes offense at an insult. He leaped from the swing and patrolled the porch with a fury that would have been comic if the children had not been sobbing. His crow pierced between the wind's teeth. In the camera's corner, you could see the porch light jitter from his pacing. He is a rooster. The sky is his contract. He believed he was doing his work. Michael tried to be useful and chose the wrong partner. He wrestled a stuck window with both hands. Rain splashed his shirt. The frame jammed harder. "This house is a disaster," he snapped over his shoulder as if the building could feel shame. Sabrina shot me a look that carried a history of small humiliations. Her hair, perfect at arrival, was now a halo of frizz that she seemed to take as a personal affront. I poured hot water over tea leaves and carried the mug to the porch where the rain scent hit the roses and made the whole world smell like iron and honey. I set the tablet on the table. I watched water find its paths. I tasted the tea the way Samuel taught me, small sips that let your mouth notice heat and relief at once. He used to say, "Silence can be the sharpest tool." He was right. Silence slices through drama and leaves only truth. Eleanor's porch light flicked on across the field. She stepped out in her raincoat, the yellow one that makes her look like a lighthouse. She raised 2 fingers from the rim of her mug. The wind lifted her white hair in a halo. I gave a half nod in return. We are fluent in short signals. Then she turned, slow as a prayer, and disappeared back inside. Witness acknowledged. Nothing else required. Upstairs, the storm taught its lesson with patience. The water on Patricia's quilt became a spreading dark. One of the cousins decided to mop and discovered my bucket under the sink, the one with a wooden handle polished by years of use. He slapped water across the kitchen floor, skidded, and caught himself on the counter with a curse he tried to swallow because the children heard it. In the dining room, the candles performed their small act of defiance again. Puff, smoke, glow, repeat. Little tragedies, small comedies. The house held them all without comment. I could have rushed in with towels. I could have shouldered for them the work of learning the shape of this place. Instead, I kept my seat and listened to the old timbers moan like a cello under the wind. The creek had a different voice now, broad, eager, insistent. Every season teaches a vocabulary. Every storm quizzes you on what you have learned. They were failing the first test because all their lives they had studied comfort instead. A boy's sob became a hiccup, then a whimper, then a laugh as Hector pecked curiously at the glass and fogged it with his breath. Sabrina's mother swatted at the candle again and declared the house haunted. One of the nephews giggled and asked if ghosts like cake. Even in chaos, light finds a slit to crawl through. I watched that slit widen. Rain has a way of rinsing pretense. Michael stood at the upstairs window with his hands on the frame and finally looked out past himself. The field wore a silver apron. The horses had turned their rumps to the wind. The maples bent in a single shared direction. On his face, the first quiet I had seen since he arrived. He placed his forehead against the glass the way he used to as a boy on winter mornings, making a round breath print that vanished as fast as it appeared. It lasted 2 seconds. It was enough. Down in the living room, Sabrina picked up one of my framed photographs to move it from a damp patch. It was Samuel in his flannel, holding a fence rail on his shoulder, eyes creased with effort and a private joke. She paused, the way city people sometimes pause when they realize a house has a past that is not theirs. Her expression softened by 1 degree. She put the photograph back with surprising care. She smoothed the cloth beneath it as if folding away an apology she was not ready to speak. The power flickered once, a soft warning, then steadied. I sipped my tea and let warmth anchor me. The wind eased. The rain stepped down from roar to drum to tap. In the upstairs hallway, the cousins discovered the linen closet and the last of the wool blankets. They made a fort between 2 chairs and hid inside it, the way children turn survival into play when adults are too busy performing outrage to show them how to endure. Michael came down at last. His shirt clung to his back. He looked older in the way honest work ages a man in a single afternoon. He opened his mouth as if to deliver another order. Then he saw me on the porch, calm, small mug in both hands, Hector composing himself into a bread loaf on the far arm of the swing. Michael did not speak. For once, he joined my silence and stepped under the porch roof to stand without shelter from the truth of the weather. "You could have told me about the windows," he said, after a long minute. "I did," I answered, "years ago." He nodded. It landed. A tiny thing. Still, it was movement. The children began to laugh inside their wool tent. Patricia surrendered to the candle and let it burn. Sabrina wrapped the itchy blanket around her shoulders and discovered that warmth can arrive dressed in discomfort. The house dripped and sighed. The storm loosened its grip. The world smelled new. I thought of Samuel. On the way, he would sharpen a chisel and say that the tool is only as honest as the hand that holds it. My silence was a tool. Tonight I held it steady. I did not scold. I did not instruct. I did not make a scene for anyone to applaud. I allowed the storm, the sticking wood, the stubborn candles, the rooster on the swing to do the teaching. And in the spaces between thunder and breath, something small and necessary began to be learned. Silence can be the sharpest tool. It can also be the gentlest. Tonight it was both. The storm passed with the kind of finality that only Vermont knows. 1 minute the house shook with thunder. The next it sat still, breathing in the quiet, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. The air smelled washed, sharp with pine and wet earth. Clouds tore open to reveal a sky that seemed impossibly wide, as though someone had stretched it just for me. The stars, thousands of them, spilled across the black like salt across a table. I settled on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The mug in my hands had gone cold, but I did not bother to warm it. My body felt both heavy and light, as if the storm had wrung me out. Through the half-closed door, I could hear the family moving about like lost travelers, trying to claim corners of comfort that simply did not exist here. Their laughter had vanished, their chatter muted. The land had begun its lesson. Then the screen door creaked. Michael stepped out, slow, as if afraid to break the fragile silence. His shirt was still damp from his battle with the window upstairs, and his shoulders sagged in a way that made him look far older than his 45 years. In his hand, he held an envelope I knew well. Samuel's handwriting, firm and deliberate, on the front. "For Michael, when he is ready." I had left it tucked in the drawer of the hall table months ago. I had not expected Michael to find it tonight. Perhaps the storm had led him there, or perhaps Samuel's timing still worked, even from beyond the grave. He did not sit beside me at first. He stood at the edge of the porch, staring out at the fields silvered by moonlight. Then, slowly, He unfolded the letter and began to read aloud, his voice low and uneven. "Protect this place," Samuel had written. "It is love made visible. Every post I hammered, every seed your mother planted, every sunrise we shared here, none of it was about land. It was about building a sanctuary where love has weight. If you forget that, you will lose more than property. You will lose yourself." The words struck the air between us, and for the first time in years, Michael's face softened. His lips pressed tight, his eyes glistened in the starlight. He folded the paper once more and clutched it as if afraid it might vanish. "I used to laugh at him, Mom," he admitted, voice hoarse. "I told him this farm was useless, that all the sweat, the broken back, the dirt under his nails, it was wasted time. I thought money was what mattered, and he called this love." He drew a breath, sharp and ragged, as though the confession itself tore something open. I was wrong. I see that now. When the storm hit, when everything went wrong tonight, I felt it. The way this place holds. It isn't weak, it isn't fragile. It's stronger than me, stronger than all of us. For a moment, my chest ached with a hope so fierce it frightened me. My son, the boy Samuel adored, the man who had scorned every fence and furrow, was standing under the stars, admitting that he had been blind. The words I had longed to hear for decades were finally here, whispered into the night air. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to take that letter and press it against my heart as proof that Samuel had not died in vain, that his words had finally reached the soul of his only son. But hope is always fragile, always tested. The screen door banged again, sharper this time. Patricia stepped out, her perfume arriving before her presence, a clashing sweetness against the clean rain air. She did not pause to honor the stars or the silence. She saw Michael with the letter and my blanket wrapped around me, and she rolled her eyes as though the scene bored her. "Well," she said, adjusting the shawl on her shoulders, "it's touching, I suppose. But let's not forget, this place is still worth a lot of money. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. You could sell tomorrow and live comfortably for the rest of your life. All of us could." The words dropped like stones in water, rippling through the fragile moment. I saw Michael flinch, the shame and tenderness draining from his expression in an instant. It was as if Patricia had reached out and slapped Samuel's letter from his hands. He did not answer her right away. He just stood there, caught between the echo of his father's voice and the weight of his mother-in-law's greed. I watched the conflict unfold on his face, remorse tangled with habit, awakening tangled with loyalty. For a second, his mouth opened as though to argue, to defend this land, to honor what Samuel had written. But Patricia's presence pressed down like a lid, and instead he looked away, folding the letter too tightly, the creases wooding into the paper. My heart broke twice in the span of a breath, once for the boy who had finally glimpsed his father's truth, and again for the man who still allowed himself to be chained by the voices of others. I said nothing. Samuel had been right. Silence can be the sharpest tool. I let Patricia's words hang in the air, naked and ugly under the brilliance of the stars. Michael finally sank onto the porch step, his head bowed, and the letter crushed in his fist. He whispered, almost to himself, "I just wanted him to be proud of me." Patricia sniffed. "Then be smart. Pride doesn't put food on the table." In that moment, the stars seemed cruel, exposing everything, his regret, her greed, my quiet sorrow. I sipped what was left of my cold tea and tucked Samuel's embroidered handkerchief tighter into my palm, the anchor that kept me from speaking words I might regret. Inside the house, laughter had died. The children were asleep, sprawled in damp wool blankets. Sabrina was scrolling her phone, searching for signals that would not come. Only the crickets and the nightbirds kept time with the weight between us. Michael pressed the letter to his forehead like a benediction, then lowered it again. "Dad wanted me to protect this place," he murmured, but maybe he knew I wasn't the one who could. Patricia's mouth opened, ready to counter with numbers and offers, but I rose before she could. My body may be old, but in that moment, it carried the full weight of dignity. I stepped back into the house, leaving them on the porch to wrestle with the stars, the silence, and the memory of a man who had built love into wood and soil. Inside, I closed the door gently, but the sound echoed through me like a vow. I would not let Samuel's letter be reduced to a bargaining chip. I would not let my husband's sanctuary be devoured by the shallow hunger of people who could not see past dollar signs. The house exhaled around me, its beams still damp, its walls whispering with rain. I set the cold mug in the sink and smoothed the flannel on the chair. My son had spoken words I never thought I would hear, yet they had been drowned too quickly by the wrong voice. The pain was sharp, yes, but it was also clarifying. The line between what could be forgiven and what could not had become clear under the stars. I held Samuel's handkerchief and whispered into the quiet, "I heard you. I won't forget." And for the first time in years, I felt both broken and whole, carried by the same silence that once carried him. Sunday morning broke with a clarity that only follows a storm. The sky was pale, almost translucent, as though the night had scrubbed it clean. The air smelled sharp, like pine needles crushed beneath boots. I drove slowly up the lane, gravel crunching beneath my tires, and the farmhouse came into view. From the distance, it looked battered but still standing, like an old soldier who had fought and survived. That was the point, after all. This land was built to endure. I parked beside the barn and stepped out, my boots pressing into the wet earth. I wore Samuel's flannel shirt, the one he had worn nearly every autumn, its fabric soft and faded, smelling faintly of cedar from the chest where I had kept it folded. On my wrist dangled the handkerchief he had embroidered years ago, edges frayed but strong. These weren't costumes. They were reminders, anchors, armor. When I reached the porch, the silence was almost comical. No laughter, no chatter, no bravado, just the sound of animals stirring, the distant crow of Hector, and the uneasy shuffling of a family that had finally run out of words. The door creaked as I opened it. Inside, they were gathered in the living room, their faces worn from lack of sleep, their clothes rumpled, their pride stripped away. Patricia sat stiff-backed on the couch, arms crossed, lips pursed in permanent disapproval. Sabrina hunched over her phone, though there was still no signal to rescue her. The children sprawled on the floor looking like abandoned dolls, eyes hollow, energy gone. And Michael, my son, stood in the middle of the room holding Samuel's letter as though it weighed more than stone. I walked past them without hurry, without ceremony. My boots left faint prints of mud across the wooden floor. I set my bag on the kitchen counter, reached up to the cabinet above the refrigerator, and pulled down the coffee maker I had tucked away weeks before. Their eyes followed me, wide and uncertain, as I plugged it in. 3 taps on my phone, and the power hummed back to life. Lights flickered, the refrigerator shuddered awake, and the comforting hiss of electricity filled the house like a returning spirit. I poured water into the machine, measured out the coffee grounds I had kept sealed in a tin, and pressed the button. The familiar aroma of brewing coffee began to curl into the air, rich and warm, cutting through the sour staleness of damp clothes and old rain. Only then did I turn. Michael's face was pale, almost boyish in its confusion. "Mom," he whispered, the word thick with disbelief. You set all of this up? The power, the animals, the storms we weren't ready for. You planned every part of it?" I looked at him for a long moment, then let my lips curve into the faintest smile. My voice, when it came, was quiet, steady, each syllable sharp enough to cut. "No, Michael, you set it up. You brought yourselves here with your assumptions, your arrogance, your sense of entitlement. You decided this house, this land, was yours to claim. I didn't arrange that. I simply refused to leave." The words landed heavier than any raised voice ever could. The silence that followed was thick, unbroken, except for the steady drip of coffee into the pot. Sabrina shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to Michael, then back to me. Patricia opened her mouth as if to argue, but the sound died before it formed. It wasn't necessary. The truth hung in the room like smoke. I had not schemed. I had endured. And endurance, it seemed, had outlasted all of them. Michael swallowed hard, his knuckles whitened around Samuel's letter. So, you knew, all along. I stepped closer, my flannel brushing against the air between us. Of course I knew. Do you think this house doesn't tell me everything? It groans when it's tired, it breathes. When it's full, it whispers when strangers treat it like a hotel. I know this land better than I know my own reflection. It doesn't bend easily, Michael. Neither do I. He lowered his gaze, shame written across his face. I just thought that you could control me? That you could walk in with your in-laws and turn this place into a playground or an investment? You thought wrong. This is not a resort. This is not a bank account waiting to be emptied. This is my home, and it will remain my home until the day I choose otherwise. Patricia scoffed, her voice cutting like a blade dulled with use. It's still just land, dirt and wood. You can't eat pride, Dorothy. You can't drink memories. I turned my head toward her, not with anger, but with pity. You see, dirt and wood. Samuel and I saw love pressed into every nail and root. That's why you'll never understand this place, Patricia. You see value only in what can be sold. I see value in what cannot be priced. The coffee maker clicked, finished with its task. I poured myself a cup, the steam curling upward like a benediction, and took a slow sip. The taste was bitter, grounding exactly as Samuel had liked it. Michael stared at me, struggling to hold on to the authority he had carried when he first arrived. But the balance had shifted. The silence that stretched from me was not weakness, it was weight. He could feel it pressing against him, reminding him that his bluster and demands had dissolved like sugar in rain. I placed the mug on the counter, my hand resting lightly on Samuel's flannel. This is not about me being clever. It is not about me outwitting you. It's about me standing still when you expect me to move. And sometimes, Michael, standing still is the most powerful thing a person can do. The words fell into him like stones into water, rippling outward. For the first time since he had arrived, his shoulders sagged, not with arrogance, but with humility. He looked around the room, at his tired children, his restless wife, his domineering mother-in-law, and then back at me. You're right, he admitted quietly, voice rough. We came here like it was ours, like you owed us. We were wrong. Patricia bristled. Michael! He cut her off with a glance sharper than any I had ever seen from him. No, don't. Not this time. I did not gloat. I did not rise in triumph. I simply picked up my mug again, letting the warmth seep into my palms. For a long while, no one spoke. The only sounds were the tick of the old clock on the wall and Hector's distant crowing from the porch swing. But it was not an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence that defines, the kind of silence that reshapes. And in that silence, the power in the room shifted completely. I no longer stood as the woman they believed they could push aside. I stood as the keeper of this house, the guardian of Samuel's promise, the one who had refused to leave. The lesson was clear, though I had not spoken it outright. Respect is not demanded with noise. It is claimed with quiet conviction. I turned my gaze toward the window, watching the morning light pour across the wet fields, and whispered, not for them, but for myself. And for Samuel, we stayed. And at that moment, I knew the house was listening. It always had. The house was quiet again by the time I returned from the kitchen with a folder tucked under my arm. The coffee still steamed in my cup, but I had no appetite for it. This moment had been waiting for years, long before Michael thought to march through my door with an army of relatives. They sat scattered across the living room like actors after a failed performance. Sabrina slouched in the armchair, scrolling her useless phone. Patricia perched upright on the sofa, her lips pinched into a permanent line of disdain. The cousins had already retreated upstairs, their absence almost a relief. Michael stood near the fireplace, his back to me, Samuel's letter folded in his hand like a confession he wasn't sure he wanted to keep. I placed the folder on the table with care. Its weight was more symbolic than physical. A collection of papers, yes, but more than that, a lifetime of choices, sacrifices, and promises I intended to honor. "Michael," I said, my voice calm, steady, "there is something you need to see." He turned, confusion etched across his face. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Deeds, certifications, notarized signatures. At the top, in bold letters, the words, "Living Trust." "This farm," I continued, "does not belong to you. It never did. Samuel and I made sure of that. Years ago, we placed it into a living trust. When I'm gone, it will not pass into your hands or Sabrina's family. It will go to the Vermont Land and Wildlife Conservancy. This land will remain what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary, for the soil, for the animals, for the memory of the life we built here." The room went still. Sabrina's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes wide, her painted mouth parted in disbelief. Patricia's face flushed red, her composure cracking like thin glass, and Michael, my son, looked as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. He staggered back a step, his hand tightening around the folded letter. You put it in a trust?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yes," I answered, "to protect it from exactly this, from greed, from quarrels, from being reduced to numbers on a check. This place was born of love, Michael, and love isn't inherited, it's earned." The words fell into the silence like stones. Sabrina blinked rapidly, her shock hardening into anger. "You can't do that," she snapped. "This is family property. Michael is your son. It should be his." Patricia leaned forward, her voice sharp and brittle. "Do you realize what you've done, Dorothy? You've robbed your own blood of their rightful inheritance. This is betrayal. Unforgivable betrayal." I met her gaze with calm. "No. What would have been betrayal is allowing Samuel's dream to be sold off piece by piece. He trusted me to guard this land. I promised him I would, and I keep my promises." Michael sank onto the edge of the hearth, his head in his hands. "All these years," he murmured, I assumed it would come to me. That was the plan. Dad worked for this. You both did. Why give it away?" I stepped closer, resting my hand lightly on the back of the chair nearest him. "Because, Michael, you never wanted the work. You wanted the reward without the sweat. This land asks for respect, for sacrifice, for love that digs its nails into the earth. You mocked that. You dismissed it. You called it worthless. That is why it will never belong to you, not because I don't love you, but because you have not earned it." His shoulders trembled, and for a moment I saw the boy he had once been, sitting at our kitchen table with scraped knees, eyes wide with questions. I longed to reach for him, to pull him back into a place where love was simple, but the years had piled too high, and the choices he had made were too clear. Sabrina shot to her feet, fury radiating off her like heat. "This is madness. You're old, Dorothy. You don't know what you're doing. Michael, tell her she can't do this." But Michael did not move. He sat frozen, staring at Samuel's words still clutched in his fist, torn between the echo of his father's voice and the demands of the woman beside him. Patricia rose too, her anger sharper. "You think silence makes you powerful, Dorothy, but all you've done is make a fool of yourself. That land could set your family up for generations, and instead you're handing it to strangers in a conservancy. Do you want to be remembered as the woman who wasted everything?" I took a slow breath, steadying the ache in my chest, and let the words come clear. I would rather be remembered as the woman who honored her husband's dream than the woman who betrayed it for money. Wealth fades, property is sold, but love, the kind you plant into the soil and build into the beams of a house, that can last forever if you protect it. The silence that followed was not the brittle silence of shock. It was heavier, denser, like a curtain drawn across a stage at the end of a play. Michael lifted his head at last. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw sorrow, regret, and something like reluctant understanding. "So that's it," he said quietly. "It's done. There's nothing I can do." "It's already done," I said, "long ago, before you ever thought to claim what was not yours." Sabrina turned away, muttering curses under her breath. Patricia gathered her purse with sharp movements, her indignation still blazing. But Michael simply sat, the folded letter trembling in his hands as though it burned with a truth too heavy to hold. I did not shout. I did not gloat. I simply gathered the papers back into the folder, each sheet sliding neatly into place. The trust was sealed, unbreakable. It was not a weapon, but a boundary, one that needed no defense beyond its own existence. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the steam rising steady, and sat in Samuel's old chair. "Love isn't inherited," I said softly, almost to myself, but loud enough for them to hear. "It's earned." The clock ticked on the mantel. Hector crowed once from the porch, as if to punctuate the moment. And in the hush that followed, I felt Samuel's presence near, a quiet warmth that told me I had done exactly what I was meant to do. The storm in the sky had passed, but another kind of storm still churned inside my house. It did not come with thunder or rain. It came with slammed drawers, angry whispers, and the sharp snap of luggage zippers. By dawn, Sabrina was already pacing from room to room, muttering into her phone. "I'll call the lawyer Monday," she hissed. "This can't be legal. We'll contest it." Her heels struck the floor like gavel blows, though she had no authority here. Patricia followed close behind, barking instructions to her grandchildren, snapping at her sons-in-law to carry bags down the stairs. The house groaned with the weight of their fury, but it was not the house breaking. It was them. I stood by the kitchen window, Samuel's flannel pulled close around my shoulders, watching the gray light stretch across the fields. Hector strutted through the wet grass as if nothing unusual had happened, his feathers gleaming. The farm had already returned to its rhythm. Only the intruders were out of step. Michael lingered in the hallway, caught between motion and paralysis. He held Samuel's letter again, unfolded now, his eyes darting over the words as though hoping they would change if he read them enough times. His face carried exhaustion, but beneath it, something softer, like a boy pressing against the memory of his father, hoping to borrow courage. Sabrina's voice sliced through the silence. "Michael, are you listening? We need to leave now. Don't just stand there." He looked at me instead of her, his eyes full of conflict, but he said nothing, and silence, once again, answered more loudly than speech. Their departure was not graceful. Suitcases banged against door frames, complaints spilled like loose nails. The children whined. Patricia muttered about wasted weekends and elder stubbornness. Finally, the convoy of SUVs roared to life outside. Gravel sprayed as they turned onto the road, engines gunning as if speed could erase humiliation. The house exhaled, empty again, still again, mine again. I sank into Samuel's old chair, exhaustion pressing into my bones, but relief steadier than any coffee. My fingers found the handkerchief in my pocket, the fabric soft from years of use. I thought of Samuel's words, his trust, his belief that love could be built into walls and soil. I had protected it, but the price of that protection still stung. To see Michael torn between two worlds, one of inheritance by blood, the other of inheritance by values, was to feel a fracture deep in my chest. The sound of footsteps on the porch startled me. For a moment I thought one of them had returned, but when I opened the door, it was Eleanor. She carried a wicker basket on her arm, a clean cloth draped over the top. Her face was lined with years, her eyes sharp and kind all at once. "I heard the engines leave before sunrise," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission, as neighbors of a certain generation always do. Sounded like a storm of its own. I gestured toward the table and she set the basket down. Fresh bread, still warm, and a jar of honey glowed beneath the cloth. The smell filled the kitchen, simple and grounding. "They're gone," I said quietly. Eleanor nodded. She lowered herself into the chair across from me, folded her hands, and studied my face the way only an old friend can. "They don't see it, Dorothy, but I do. You built this place with love. Every nail, every seed, every morning you chose to stay. You wove love into it. That's something no storm and no greedy hand can undo." Her words struck deeper than I expected. I felt heat gather behind my eyes, but I blinked it back. Sometimes I wonder if Samuel would think I went too far, I admitted, if he would have wanted me to fight so fiercely. Eleanor's smile was soft but unwavering. Samuel trusted you to keep his dream alive. You didn't fight, Dorothy. You endured. You let silence do the speaking. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. I let her words settle. Outside, the fields glistened, rinsed clean by rain. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry sharp against the morning air. The world was already moving forward, unbothered by the chaos of one family's unraveling. Michael's face lingered in my thoughts, the way he held the letter like a lifeline, the way regret shadowed his eyes. There had been a crack in him, small but real. Whether it widened into change or closed back into hardness was no longer mine to decide. I don't know if he'll ever forgive me, I said. Eleanor shook her head gently. That's not your work, Dorothy. Forgiveness belongs to him. Your work was protecting what was sacred, and you did. We shared the bread she had brought, tearing it by hand, dipping pieces into the golden honey. It tasted of sun and earth, of something older than both of us. We ate in silence, the comfortable kind where nothing more needs to be said. Through the open window came the sounds of the farm, hens clucking, the creek murmuring, Hector crowing with full-throated pride. The same sounds Samuel had loved, the same sounds that had taught me, year after year, that endurance is not weakness but a form of strength most people never understand. They'll tell their version of this story, Eleanor said after a while, wiping her hands on the cloth. Sabrina will say you're selfish. Patricia will say you're foolish. Maybe even Michael will stumble between anger and regret. But out here, the truth is louder than their words. This farm is proof, and anyone who stands on this porch long enough will feel it. I nodded, clutching Samuel's handkerchief. For the first time since the storm, my chest loosened. The weight of judgment, theirs and mine, lifted, if only a little. When Eleanor rose to leave, she touched my shoulder, firm and steady. Rest now, she said. The land is safe. You are safe. I watched her cross the field back to her own house, her yellow raincoat catching the light of the rising sun. And I thought of how some people enter our lives not to fix them, but to mirror back what we already know. The family had left in anger. The silence they left behind was not empty. It was full of echoes, full of unraveling, and in those echoes, I heard the truth more clearly than ever. This place was not about inheritance or money. It was about love, made visible and protected at last. A week passed, and the house returned to its rhythm. The mornings came early, crisp and silver with mist. I fed the chickens, walked the fence lines, and mended what needed mending. The silence no longer carried tension. It was the good kind, the silence that sings when a storm has moved on. Then, one afternoon, as I sorted the mail at the kitchen table, I found an envelope with handwriting I recognized instantly. Michael's. My breath caught in my throat. It had been years since my son wrote me a letter. He lived by emails, texts, quick calls, not ink and paper. For him to sit and write meant something had shifted. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the pages. The ink was uneven in places, as though the pen had slipped from calloused hands. I began to read. Mom, I don't know how to begin this except to say I'm sorry, not just for last weekend, but for years of not understanding, for treating your life and Dad's dream as something small. I thought success was measured in square footage and stock returns. I thought dignity came from status. I was wrong. After we left, I couldn't shake Dad's letter. His words burned. So I drove to Colorado, to a volunteer camp for veterans. They work with horses here, teach them to trust again after battle, the way they teach the men to trust themselves again. I signed up to help, not knowing what I was doing, and for the first time, I'm learning what Dad meant. The work is hard. My back aches. My hands are blistered. Yesterday, I shoveled manure for 6 hours straight. The younger me would have sneered. But when I stood back and saw the stalls clean, the animals calm, I felt something I've never felt before. Pride that wasn't about money. Pride in sweat, in dirt, in honest work. I finally understand what Dad meant when he said there is dignity in work. I think I even understand you a little better, too. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. I only know I want to earn it. Maybe one day I'll come back to Vermont, not to take, but to help, if you'll let me. Until then, I'll stay here a while, learn what my hands are capable of, maybe learn what my heart is capable of, too. Love, Michael. By the time I reached the last line, my throat had tightened to the point where I could barely swallow. My eyes blurred, the words swimming, but I had them memorized already. I pressed the paper against my chest where Samuel's handkerchief rested and felt the two overlap, my husband's promise and my son's awakening. I whispered Samuel's name into the quiet kitchen. He's learning, at last. The clock ticked, steady and sure. Outside, Hector crowed as though to punctuate the moment, while the horses shifted in the pasture, their tails flicking against the flies. Life went on as it always had, but something inside me shifted too. A wound long carried had begun, just barely, to close. I read the letter again, slower this time, my voice breaking on certain phrases. Dignity in work. How many times had Samuel tried to show him that truth? How many years had I prayed my son would see beyond the lure of wealth? And now, far away in Colorado, among veterans and horses, Michael had finally taken the first step. I did not fool myself into thinking everything was healed. Letters are promises, not proof. But they are also seeds, and seeds, if tended, can grow into something strong. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the drawer where Samuel's flannel still lay, where his handkerchief rested when I wasn't carrying it. Then I sat by the window, watching the light stretch across the fields, and allowed myself to feel both the ache and the relief. My son was not lost, not completely, and as I pressed the handkerchief to my cheek, I could almost hear Samuel's voice, steady and warm. "See, Dorothy? Even rocky soil can surprise you when the rain finally comes." I smiled through my tears. Yes, it was true. And perhaps, just perhaps, the harvest of love we planted all those years ago was not finished yet. 3 days after Michael's letter, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table while I was kneading bread. Flour dusted the air like early snow. Hector crowed his usual opinions from the porch swing. The horses flicked their tails in the pasture. I wiped my hands on a towel and checked the screen. A new message from Michael. A video. I set the phone upright against the sugar jar and pressed play. The image steadied on a barn I did not recognize, larger than mine, with a row of flags tacked above the doors. A veteran's place, I remembered from his letter. The camera shook as Michael propped it on a hay bale. He stepped back into the frame wearing a sweat-darkened shirt and borrowed work gloves. His hair was damp, his face streaked with dust. He looked as if the city had finally leaked out of him. "Stall 3, a voice called off screen, "and don't cheat the corners." Michael nodded and wrapped his arms around a bale of hay that was at least as stubborn as he used to be. He heaved. The twine cut into his gloves. The bale barely budged. He tried again, legs braced, breath hard and fast. On the third try, he found a rhythm, a sway built from back and hips, not shoulders. The bale slid. The camera caught his quick grin, bright and surprised, the look of a man feeling simple competence landing in his body. When he hauled the bale into the stall, a bay gelding snorted and bumped him with a shoulder that weighed more than any argument. Michael stumbled, grabbed the rail, and laughed. Not a performative laugh, a real one. A younger volunteer reached to steady him. Michael waved him off with thanks and went back to work. Shovel, toss, rake, water, slow, awkward, then smoother. The video timestamp ticked forward. He did not quit. Near the end, he tried to wheel a barrow mounded too high with manure and wet shavings. One wheel dropped into a rut. The whole thing tipped. His boot slid and he landed on one knee in the mess. He looked at the camera, breathless, hair stuck to his forehead, and shook his head with a kind of half-smile that I had not seen since he was 12. Then he picked everything up. He did not swear. He did not blame me. He finished. The video cut to a short clip of him brushing the bay gelding, strokes long and even. The horse's eyelids sagged with pleasure. Michael murmured something I could not hear, his voice low and careful. The animal breathed against his shoulder. For a full 10 seconds, nothing happened. Work paused and became stillness. Then the clip ended. I did not realize I had been holding my breath until the screen went black and my chest ached. I pressed my palm to Samuel's handkerchief in my apron pocket and said aloud to the empty kitchen, "Good." When I opened the comments, because of course there were comments, I felt the whole world lean forward at once. Friends from his old life cheered him on. Veterans thanked him. A rancher advised better boots. Then Sabrina appeared, as inevitable as rain. Her profile picture was polished and bright. Her words were colder than snow. "This is why we divorced," she wrote. "He plays farm until it hurts, then quits. Some men never grow up." The line sat there like a rusty nail, sharp enough to catch skin. Replies flooded beneath it. "Not fair," someone wrote. "At least he is trying," another added. A few agreed with her. A few tore into her. The worst part was not the cruelty or the praise. It was the way the debate treated my son like a spectacle instead of a person learning to be new. The algorithm wanted a fight. My thumb hovered over the reply box and did not move. I shut the app and let the kitchen settle around me. Bread needed folding, coffee needed pouring. Outside, Hector hopped up onto the porch swing, tried a cautious peck at the chain, and settled in like a landlord collecting rent. The day did not care about online storms. I played the video again without the comments. This time, I watched only his hands. They were not office hands anymore. The knuckles were raw in places, the wrists strong. He had always been quick with numbers. The muscle he was building now did not erase that. It added to it. For the first time, I could imagine him here, moving through my barn without startling the horses, mending what breaks before it fails, checking water before the frost comes. I did not rush the vision. I let it pass slowly through me like sunlight across a floor. A message pinged. Another clip. Michael stood beside an older man with a prosthetic leg and a gentle posture. "This is Marcus," Michael said. "He taught me to slow my breathing so the horses don't panic." Marcus looked into the camera and nodded once in that veteran way that says both yes and enough. "Your boy works," he said. "He shows up. That is more than most." I swallowed the ache in my throat. I wanted to write thank you. I did not. I put the kettle on and let the whistle be my answer. The afternoon turned to honey. The maples threw coins of light against the floor. I walked the fence line and thought about the comment section still roaring in a world that always has time for judgment. People love a redemption story when it happens fast. They do not know what to do with the long, quiet kind. The kind measured in chores done well and mornings you show up even when no one is watching. At dusk, I fed the horses and stayed to watch them eat. Chewing is a sacred sound when you have known hunger of any kind. The bay gelding in the video crossed my mind. I wondered if he stood with one hind foot cocked the way thunder does when he is content. A wind skimmed the pasture and raised goose flesh on my forearms that had nothing to do with cold. Later, I made tea and read Michael's letter again. I had tucked it in the drawer with the handkerchief and brought it out like a small, steady flame. Some lines still caught my breath. "Dignity in work. I want to earn it." Behind those words, I could feel Samuel's hand on his shoulder, not stern, not soft, simply present, the way he was with both of us in the days that were hardest. The urge to answer the comments returned, smaller now, and I let it pass. I do not need to convince strangers. I do not need to correct Sabrina. I need only to keep my promise to a man who believed love could be built like a house and tended like a field. My son can learn beside that house and that field if he chooses. Or he can learn elsewhere and come home different. Both roads require time. I set the cup down and pressed my palm flat on the table, feeling the grain. "Redemption is a marathon, not a sprint," I said into the room. The oak did not answer, but it seemed to agree. Before bed, I sent Michael 6 words and nothing more. "Keep going. I'm watching. Be careful." Outside, stars pricked the dark clean as stitches. Somewhere a coyote lifted a thread of song and then let it fall. The rooster on the porch slept with his head tucked back. Tomorrow he would announce the sun whether anyone liked it or not. I turned off the light, folded Samuel's handkerchief beneath my pillow the way I do when I need courage, and let the house breathe around me. The world would argue in the morning. The farm would not. And that is where I keep my trust. Winter arrived sharp and uncompromising. Vermont does not ease into cold, it plunges. The snow came heavy, stacking itself on the barns, muffling the fields, pressing silence against the windows until the world outside looked carved from marble. One morning, as I shoveled the drift from the porch, I heard the crunch of boots on frozen gravel. I looked up to see Michael. Alone this time. No convoy of SUVs, no entourage of in-laws, just him, shoulders hunched against the wind, a wool cap pulled low, his breath rising white into the air. He stopped at the gate, as though waiting for permission. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he raised his gloved hand, a simple gesture that carried more weight than 1,000 apologies. "Mom," he said quietly, "if you'll let me, I'd like to work with you today." The words did not come polished. They came raw, the way breath does in cold air. I nodded once, then turned back to the shovel. He stepped inside the gate and followed me toward the barn. The morning became a blur of labor. We cleared snow from paths, our shovels biting into ice, lifting, tossing, our arms moving in rhythm, though we did not plan it. His breath puffed in sharp bursts, mine steadier but thinner. Once when the wind cut harder, he instinctively moved to block it from me, his frame shielding mine. He did not remark on it, neither did I. When the horses stamped impatiently, Michael carried buckets of water across the yard. They sloshed against his legs, soaking him in the freezing air, but he did not complain. He set them down carefully, rubbed each animal's neck, and looked them in the eyes as Samuel once did. I recognized the posture. I recognized the tenderness. It startled me. How much of his father flickered in him when he thought no one noticed. The slowest work came in the barn, where the stalls needed mucking. I handed him a pitchfork. He accepted it without hesitation. Together, we moved straw and manure side by side, breath rising white in clouds that caught the light like incense. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and the faint sweetness of horses. There was no conversation, only the scrape of metal against wood, the rustle of straw, the snorts of animals who understood we were doing our part. I caught myself studying his face when he bent to lift a forkful. No longer the smooth face of my boy nor the polished mask of the businessman, but something in between. Weathered, real. At one point, he slipped on a patch of ice inside the doorway. His hand shot out, caught the rail, steadied himself. He laughed, not with arrogance, but with humility. The sound startled me, like hearing music I thought had been lost. We paused only once, leaning on our forks, our breath clouding the air. He looked at me, cheeks red from cold, sweat darkening his collar. "It's harder than I thought," he admitted, "but it feels right." I did not answer aloud. I only pressed Samuel's handkerchief, folded in my pocket between my fingers. The barn light caught motes of dust swirling with the steam of our breath. In that moment, time slowed, as though the whole world wanted to hold still long enough for me to notice. The silence between us was different now, not the hollow silence of resentment, not the brittle silence of unspoken judgment. This silence was full of effort, of presence, of the faint possibility that something broken could be mended. I thought to myself, this silence is different, no longer empty. It is full of presence. By afternoon, we had cleared the stalls, freshened the bedding, and led the horses out to the paddock. Michael leaned on the gate, shoulders heaving, eyes bright with exhaustion. Snowflakes had gathered in his beard, turning him into a figure half farmer, half penitent pilgrim. I stood beside him, my bones aching, my heart both weary and alive. I did not thank him. He did not ask for thanks. We simply watched the horses step into the snow, their dark bodies stark against the white. The sun sagged low, throwing long shadows across the field. Michael finally spoke, his voice hushed as though he feared breaking whatever fragile thread had stretched between us. "I don't know if I'll ever be the man Dad hoped I'd be, but I'm trying, Mom, and maybe that's the choice I should have made a long time ago." I placed my hand briefly on his arm, the gesture small but steady. "Trying is a choice," I said. "And sometimes that's enough." We walked back toward the house in silence, but the silence no longer hurt. It carried us, like the snow carrying the light of the moon. Spring came late that year, as if winter wanted to cling to me one more time before releasing its grip. But when it did arrive, it came all at once. The fields turned tender green. The apple trees trembled with blossoms. Daffodils speared the thawed earth, insistent and bright. The farm, weary from snow, breathed again. I spent the morning in the garden, kneeling on the soft ground, pressing seeds into the rows Samuel and I had once planned together. My hands ached, my knees protested, but the ache felt like prayer. Each seed covered was a reminder that something could begin again, even after long silence. The crunch of boots on gravel made me lift my head. Michael stood at the gate. He was not dressed. For business, not wrapped in arrogance. He wore work jeans, mud already streaking the hems, and a plain shirt rolled at the sleeves. The wind caught his hair and scattered it across his forehead. He looked less like the man who once barged in with demands and more like a boy asking for permission to play. He walked slowly, as if the earth beneath him might collapse if he rushed. When he reached me, he did not speak right away. He looked at the rows of soil, at the blossoms overhead, at the life pressing forward without asking him to control it. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, voice low, "I'm not here to ask for the land. I know it isn't mine. I know it never will be. I don't want to take it from you or anyone else. I want a chance. Not to own, not to inherit. A chance to stay, to learn, to work, to be part of this place in a way I never let myself before." The words hung in the air, delicate as the petals drifting from the apple trees. I studied with him. His face bore the roughened edges of labor. His hands were marked with small scars, the kind only work can leave. His eyes, once always darting to the next advantage, now held steady, meeting mine without demand. I searched for arrogance, for calculation. I did not find them. What I found instead was something new, something raw. I did not answer right away. Instead, I stood, brushed the soil from my knees, and walked to the porch. From the old wooden chest, I drew out a pair of gloves, Samuel's gloves, worn soft with years of use, the fingertips patched, the leather cracked but whole. I had kept them as a relic, a piece of him that still carried the shape of his hands. When I returned to Michael, I held them out. He looked at them, puzzled. "These were your father's," I said. "He wore them every season, no matter how frayed they became. He never bought new ones because he said they reminded him that work leaves its mark, and that's what makes it matter." Michael reached for them slowly, almost reverently. He slid them on. They were a little too big. Samuel's hands had been broad, but they fit enough. He flexed his fingers, and I saw something pass across his face. Not triumph, not ownership, recognition. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I let the gesture be the answer. We turned back to the garden. Side by side, we knelt in the soil. Our hands pressed seeds into the earth, covered them, watered them. The silence between us was not brittle anymore. It was soft, alive, expanding. I thought of all the silences we had carried, angry silences, wounded silences, empty silences. This silence was different. It was full of presence, full of the weight of choice. As the sun lowered and the shadows stretched long across the field, I leaned back on my heels, wiped the dirt from my hands, and looked at my son. His breath came steady, his shirt clung with sweat, but his eyes were calm, softer than I had ever seen them. I whispered, the words more to myself than to him, but I knew he heard them. Love isn't inherited, it's earned, one sunrise at a time. The petals continued to fall. The earth continued to breathe, and for the first time in many years, I felt that maybe the future could hold not just endurance, but hope.